Grand. So morning, thank you very much for joining us, and welcome back if you've joined us for one of these sessions before. My name's Lucy, so you will have had Sam doing this bit before, but Sam is off this week, so I am her probably not so excellent replacement, but hopefully we'll be all right. And so if you haven't joined us before, welcome. And we work for Eden Project Communities. So normally we're doing lots of lovely things, connecting people via face-to-face events, mostly across the UK, and encouraging people to take positive action in their communities. At the moment, obviously, we're doing lots of things online. So we've got lots of sessions and workshops and talks, and we'll pop a link in the chat later so you can find out more about those. But this morning, we're joined by Alison and Susan for the third in a series of poetry and paint workshops, which we're very excited about, and I know lots of you have really been enjoying. I'm also joined by my colleague Katie, lovely, waving there, who will be on in the background doing lots of technical bits and pieces. So if you've got any questions, please pop them in the chat and we can answer them. And yeah, Katie will be here to help out and do breakout rooms and things like that. So, as normal, if you can keep yourselves on mute when you're not speaking, that really helps with the quality of the sound. You'll come in automatically on mute. But if you want to talk, you can do. There'll be bits where we can have questions, and then you'll just need to unmute yourself. As I said, if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat box. If anybody in your house is streaming a video in the background, that might affect the quality. So you could ask them to turn off videos, that would be useful. And as Sam has probably mentioned before, Alison and Susan are in Alison's studio, so they're socially distancing, but they're in the same space. So if you hear a little bit of feedback, that's because there might be a bit of echo between their devices. If that gets too much, then just let us know, pop a message in the chat, and we'll see if we can work something out with that. You might hear, a little bit of kind of high-pitched noise or a little bit of echo, but we can normally work through it. It's just because they're in the same space. And thank you, Tracy, my colleague has just suggested. You can watch this on speaker view, which will give you a nice big view, especially when Alison's working. So at the top of your screen, you should have a box with 9 dots. And if you toggle that, you should be able to flip between speaker view, which will be the person that's speaking, or gallery view, which is everybody on the call. And I think, have I forgotten anything else, Katie or Tracy, or does that seem... They're shaking their heads, so that seems good. Okay. Oh, we're recording this session. So just for those people that couldn't attend, we'll share a video with them afterwards. So if you don't want to be in the recording, you can turn your video off. All right. I think I'm going to hand over now to Alison and Susan just to introduce themselves quickly, and then we'll go into some breakout rooms where you can speak to each other for a few minutes. All right. So Alison and Susan, over to you guys.
Hi there.
Hi, Alison.
Hi, lovely to see everyone. I think we've got quite a few people who are rejoining us, which is lovely. And for those who are new to the call, welcome to my studio. So you're joining us up in Bowness-on-Solway, so just beside the Scottish border. And we're really looking forward to what could be quite a zany session, I think. So I'll let Susan say hello and then we'll get started.
Hi everybody, great to see so many people. Really looking forward to this morning's session, which promises to be weird and wonderful in the tradition of Cabinets of Curiosity. We've had lots of lovely work come in from the first 2 sessions, and I'm really sorry if there's anyone who's sent stuff through and haven't had a response yet. We're still working our way through that and enjoying it very much. We'll say a little bit more at the end, but we are still planning to put work from each of the 3 sessions together in a way that can be displayed, again in the best tradition of Cabinets of Curiosity. And we'll ask people probably to try and let us have anything they want to contribute by the beginning of next week, but we'll say a bit more about that later. But meanwhile, on with the show. Thank you very much.
Lovely, thank you both. So I think as we've done before, and for those of you that are new, it's lovely to have the chance just to say hello to a couple of other people that are on the session with you. So my colleague Katie has set up some breakout rooms. So you'll get an invitation to a breakout room if you just click accept on it, and you'll just have 5 minutes with 2 or 3 other people to just introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about the object that you've brought with you. So the object that sparks stories. So Katie, if you open those rooms now, lovely, and everybody just accept theirs, and we'll see you all in a few minutes. Screen, lovely. So welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a chance to have a nice little chat with some people and just to say hello. So I'm going to hand straight over to Alison, who is going to run through a bit more about what we're doing this session. So Alison, over to you.
And I thought that might be the best way to start us off thinking about these strange and wonderful cabinets. So just to give you the general idea, Susan and I were inspired by an item in the Wordsworth Trust collection, which is Robert Southey's Cabinet of Curiosities, full of all manner of weird and wonderful objects. And we thought, well, that would be an interesting thing to explore. Oh my goodness, the more you look, the more you find. So Cabinets of Curiosities originally were whole rooms full of objects. So would you move us on to the first slide, Lucy? So here we go. They were hugely popular in the sort of 16th and 17th century. And you can see this is an illustration from one particular cabinet, but each collector had their own interests and their own collections, and they were a really eclectic mix. And they were whole rooms. So the German word was Wunderkammer, literally wonder rooms. And the idea is that you walked in and you were awed by the sheer amount of weird and wonderful stuff. And you can see it was all over. It was on the ceilings, it was in drawers, it was on the walls. So a usual collection would usually feature certain things. There'd be a mixture of sort of art, antiques. Then there'd be sort of specimens from there'd be natural history, there'd be things like skeletons, collections of insects, shells, taxidermy, geology, archaeological bits and pieces, ethnography, weapons, costumes, and then you'd have mythical creatures. You know, there was always like a basilisk in there somewhere. So they were just completely mad collections. And they were loosely categorized. So there were 4 sort of main categories. Artificialia, so the human-made things, naturalia, so natural objects, exotica, so exotic plants, animals, that sort of thing, and scientifica, so scientific objects and instruments. So one of the early examples of a sort of early and famous collection in Britain was one in London, a collector called John Tredescant, and there's a list here of a few items that an early visitor back in the 1600s wrote about the treasures in his collection. So in his particular collection, there were plants, vines, shells, zoological specimens, a dodo from Mauritius, a walrus jaw, armadillos, weapons, costumes, a mermaid's hand, a dragon's egg, 2 feathers from a phoenix's tail, and a vial of blood that rained in the Isle of Wight. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour. So this first image here is actually an engraving, and it's from someone called Old Worm's Cabinet of Curiosities. So he was a famous Scandinavian collector and a physician, and I think his collection was actually quite scientific. So similar in as much as it was categorized into these sections, but his full title for his museum was Worm's Museum, or The History of Very Rare Things, Natural and Artificial, Domestic and Exotic, which is stored in the author's house in Copenhagen. So there's a title and a half for you. So anyway, you can see from this engraving, so this is an engraving made as the front panel for his catalogue a year after his death. So if you would move us on one slide, Lucy. This next one is a modern installation made by an artist called Rosamund Purcell, who's an American artist. And she spent years fascinated by that engraving. And the more she looked, the more she wondered. And so eventually she started thinking about recreating a room that would be as close as she could get it to how it felt to walk into Old Worm's cabinet. So this is an installation now on permanent display in the National Museum in Denmark, so quite close to where the original cabinet would have been. And you can see she got fascinated by, you know, she replicates all the drawers of specimens and minerals. Her interest really, I think, is partly in how objects are catalogued, how they're labelled in museums, and how things are classified. So, kind of interestingly, back in these early cabinets, there was no real need for chronology or even accuracy. You know, labels could be whatever the collector wanted them to be. So sometimes very factual, sometimes completely made up, and it didn't necessarily matter. So really at odds with how we think of a museum collection now. Would you move us on to the next one, Lucy? Thank you. So this one, hopefully you can see, it's so Lavinius Vincent's Wonder Theatre. This is from 1706, and the image itself is by Bert van der Rome. So again, it gives you the impression of what these cabinets were. I mean, this one looks absolutely huge, and you can see how people are just wandering around, and it's really hands-on. So the idea was these were partly about entertainment, they were about sparking curiosity, and they were about allowing people to pick things up and handle them and converse, you know, talk to each other about them and make sort of connections in their brain between one object and the next. So maybe a bit like a virtual encyclopedia, I suppose. So you can kind of get the sense as well that art and science were sort of fluid. They were all part of one thing. They weren't really separate. And so obviously they were also a statement of, you know, they were telling you all about the collector and how clever he was and how much he travelled and what his own interests were. So this is a list from this particular picture we're looking at. This is a list written by someone of what the 8 cabinets contained in this Wonder Theatre. So 600 files of animal cadavers in spirits, 288 boxes of indigenous and exotic insects, 32 drawers of shells and crustaceans, 14 drawers of minerals and fossils, a cabinet with a woodland scene made from corals and sponges. So that gives you a bit of a sense of the mixture of stuff in there. Would you move us on again, Lucy, to the next one? So this next one is a close-up detail of Powhatan's mantle, which is an object now in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. So it's a detail in as much as it's quite a large deer hide, the actual piece, and it's decorated with tiny cowrie shells. So when I was saying about how really labelling was up to the collector, and so was display and so was interpretation, and whether things were fact or fiction was really, it didn't matter really. The whole point was that this was a space for curiosity and imagination. And the significant, well, there's a couple of significant things about this. One is that it sort of marks that early moment in time where colonists were trading with the North American people, and this would have been one of those early objects that was brought back, and therefore fascinating to people to see something of this new world and try and understand, you know, what it might be like. But then the other aspect is it was also he was said to be Pocahontas's father, and people loved the idea that, you know, they could touch something that belonged to Pocahontas's father. Now, whether it really belonged to him, nobody knows. Nobody even knows, to be honest, whether it was even a cloak at all. You know, it may not have been an item of clothing, but it doesn't really matter, if you see what I mean. All of that is invested in the object because somebody chose to label it that way, and people chose to believe it. So anyway, could you move us on to the next one, Lucy? So the next one, this is a trompe d'oeil painting. So literally a painting that's made to trick your eye. So it's made to look like a cabinet that's open. And again, so this is from roughly about 1690, made by Domenico Remps. So it shows a kind of, it's a good example really of the juxtaposition of objects. So it wasn't just about the objects themselves, it was also about the way they were placed next to each other and how that might make you think about certain ideas or concepts. It's also the idea that objects might represent a wider world, you know, a whole universe out there, really. So you'll see top right, there's a skull in there, which was a very normal thing. That whole concept of memento mori, the idea of being reminded that, you know, you are mortal, which sounds a bit gloomy and a bit macabre to us perhaps now, but I think in its day it was kind of a reminder to seize the day. Actually, I think it wasn't necessarily as gloomy as you might think, but they often would have an hourglass or something like that, which was this reminder of your own mortality. So I suppose objects were, in one way they were specimens, in another way they were witnesses, perhaps. Perhaps they offered clues to a world. They almost were offering a puzzle for your brain to work your way around that cabinet and see what connections you could make in your own mind. So the groupings of objects were quite significant in their own right. So I suppose it's fair to say that during the sort of 18th century, science started to become a more defined discipline on its own terms. And that's when these cabinets of curiosity started to become, well, not exactly obsolete, but the collections were given to museums and they started to become a very different thing that was chronologically ordered, classified differently, labelled differently. So could you move us on to the next one, please, Lucy? So this is a film still. It's a piece by Victoria Adokwe-Bully, made in 2018. So she's a poet and an artist who worked as artist in residence at the Victoria and Albert Museum for a period of time. And she was particularly interested in working a wider research project going on there that was looking at absentee slave owners and how their wealth actually supported the collection of a lot of these objects in the V&A particularly, but actually really in most of our museum collections. And this is a film still from a film she made, it's quite short, called We the Dead. She made 5 films altogether as part of that residency, and as a whole they're called A Series of Unfortunate Inheritances. And they're beautiful. We'll put a link in at the end of this session so that you can look at them. They're not terribly long, and they're somewhere between poetry and performance, and they very much draw out the human face of slavery and actually trace the backstory of what went into some of these objects, where they actually came from and the way in which we acquired them. And I suppose it's very timely, really. This is a question that museums are looking at right now, how to acknowledge and confront and engage with, you know, the violent past, really, that delivered some of these objects into our collections. Right, could you move us on, Lucy, to the next one? So we're going to skip through to Damien Hirst here. So this is a piece that he made for Derol's in Paris. So Derol is a sort of naturalist and taxidermy shop in Paris, and he has an extraordinary collection. Damien Hirst is very, very interested in cabinets of curiosity. So I'm going to read you something he said about this piece of work. So he says, people have been making curiosity cabinets for almost 500 years. And it's something that's always fascinated me. They inhabit a space between life and death that says so much about who we are as humans and who we might want to be. And I suppose he's right about that. They do tell you as much about the collector and that person's interests, identity, or even just how they choose to present themselves to the world, if you like. So I suppose cabinets of curiosity, maybe the equivalent nowadays might be an Instagram account or a Pinterest account, where someone has kind of, you know, quite carefully curated the things they want the world to know about them and the things they find interesting. So anyway, this particular piece of work, it's got a long title, so it's called Signification, Hope, Immortality and Death in Paris, Now and Then. He made it in 2014. So I suppose, you know, he's particularly looking at the sort of juxtaposition of the objects there, the artificial and the natural. So he is an artist that's got a huge collection of his own, particularly of taxidermy. And he often does use this format of kind of cabinets and laying out objects and arranging them such that your mind makes questions and connections, wonders about interconnectedness maybe. So move us on to the next one if you would, Lucy. This is also by Damien Hirst. So this, you know, is a famous piece. The actual title, The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living, made in 1991. So this is a piece that I suppose caused a shock really to the art world at the time and made him very famous. Fair to say, I think that his use of the shock value is something that can be morally questionable, perhaps, depending on how you look at it. So this is a 14-foot tiger shark preserved in formaldehyde in a vitrine. And I think it is directly related to Cabinets of Curiosity. It's the same thing, really, that's happening there when you walk into a room and see it. You are amazed by the sheer wonder of such a creature. There is something beautiful about it, but there's also something very macabre, and there's something just awe-inspiring but strange at the same time. And I think that does sort of sum up, you know, the vibe of these Cabinets of Curiosity. So would you move us on to one more, Lucy, the next one? So there's two pieces of work here. The one on the left is called Where Are We Going? Where Do We Come From? Is There a Reason? 2000 to 2004. So there are 70 species of skeletons in that cabinet, and an extraordinarily long label to try and make you think about the things he'd like you to think about, I suppose. And the image on the right is called For the Love of God, made in 2007. And this one is a platinum skull set with 8,601 diamonds. So there's a pink diamond in the forehead, and the skull is a real skull. It dated from the 18th century. And he took that to Bentley and Skinner, who were jewellers to the Queen, got them to set the diamonds in it. So, yeah, well, what can I say? I suppose it links directly to the memento mori idea, but there's also a twist on that. It's quite blingy and quite in your face, I would suggest, quite loud, quite obvious, very showy and entertaining in much the same way that the Cabinets of Curiosity were, actually. And it is a display of wealth and power and opulence in all the same ways. So this is what Damien Hirst actually says about this piece. It's interesting because I think the way he sees it is very different than my own view on it. So he thought about it. He said, what's the maximum you could pit against death? Diamonds came to mind. So that's why he chose the material he chose. The title, For the Love of God, apparently came from his mother, who I can well believe is known to say things, for the love of God, what are you going to do next? I can only imagine. And then he also, reflecting on the piece when it was actually made, because obviously he had the idea and then someone else made it. So there's that interesting thing where you don't actually know what it's going to feel like until you see it. And he says it has a kind of quietness, a transcendent feel to it. It's sort of mesmerizing and optimistic. That's what he says about it. So clearly either he feels those things about it or he wants to label it that way. Either way, I'm not quite sure. Right, could you move us to the next one, Lucy? So we're going to shift now to Elizabeth Blackadder, who is a painter based up in Edinburgh. I think she's 88 now. So these are two beautiful studies, both fairly recent. I think I would say that she uses objects. She also collects objects, much like Damien Hirst, but her objects tend to be more, collections from her travels. So lots of things like Japanese fans, boxes, kimonos, plants, collection. Well, she says herself, I'm a collector of everything. So she uses objects as well to reflect on the world around her. I would suggest that the quiet way in which she approaches this subject probably suggests all the things that Damien Hirst lays out in his titles, but in a rather less obvious way. So the one on the left there seed pods and bees, I think is a beautiful piece of drawing. But also, if you look at how it's composed, it kind of slightly reflects, I think, the cycles of life, the way she's placed everything. And then there's always, as well as gorgeous observation and skill, there's always an abstract quality, which, so if you look at the bees, they really replicate the shape of the pods. And I think in her work, she really looks at that interconnectedness between objects, but also between scale, which was, I think, another aspect of these cabinets of curiosity. And the one on the right, Purple Irises, I would say is a wonderful reflection on possibly life and death. You could put it that way. You know, there's a very faint fading on the right there, which is quiet, beautiful. I would suggest transcendent, even without a diamond in sight. For me, that's more powerful, but that's only my interpretation. So John Layton is a man who's just who wrote a wonderful book about Elizabeth Blackadder for a big retrospective show she had up in Edinburgh not so many years ago. And I'm going to quote something from him here, which I think is interesting. He says, he went to speak to her in her studio, and he describes a vast collection of objects and souvenirs cluttering every surface, evoking not just a lifetime of memories, but suggesting latent creative energy, a vast source of raw material. And he goes on to sort of muse about the fact that she's really, although she's been working for years and is highly acclaimed, she's not really as famous as she should be in many ways. And he says, perhaps our taste has become more attuned to the loud and the brash in art at the expense of quieter mastery and refinement. Certainly her natural reticence and modesty seem at odds with the extravagant outpourings of many contemporary artists. That's his view. And I know what he means, though, about quiet mastery. And she doesn't talk about her work an awful lot. She lets the work speak for itself. Would you put us on to the next slide, Lucy? We've just got a couple more. So this is another piece, also by Elizabeth Blackadder. So Still Life with Fan, made in 1980. So you can see how she's arranged her objects there, and it's on a perfectly flat background. So it's almost as though she's arranged things literally on a piece of paper and looking down at them. Now, the arrangement of objects will be significant to her. The objects themselves will be important to her. But actually the arrangement is an abstract thing. She's thinking about how to arrange light and dark, the heaviness and the light bits. And she's balancing that in a very abstract way, which is, you know, actually a very Japanese way of looking at painting too. So another thing I thought we might take from her when we look at our own work is what we would call the negative space. So the spaces in between the objects. She often does paint the space around things. So could you move us on to the next one, Lucy? Thank you. So here we go. This is a lovely example. You can see how with this one, Still Life with Gerbera's Moonlight, she's placing the objects such that they're almost having a conversation. I see this as a really poetic piece of painting. So it's almost like they're having a chat, these objects, and you're listening in. The moonlight sort of provides a context, I suppose. And it seems to me that she's painted the space between those objects. So yes, she's chosen what to paint and she's decided where it'll sit, but the actual composition is very important, because the gaps that she leaves are really where that conversation's taking place, if that makes sense. Could you move us on to the last slide, Lucy, please? So two paintings there. The one on the left, Fred and the Chest of Drawers, is, I think, on one hand quite funny because, you know, cats get everywhere, but on the other, it kind of sums up her lovely approach to painting objects and everything in her world. So she's chosen to take a certain angle on that piece of furniture, which brilliantly is a cabinet, I suppose, in its way. And I love that she's chosen to have some drawers open and some shut. So she's creating a sort of push and pull in and out of the picture. And the objects themselves are arranged so that there's this lovely kind of abstract composition. And Fred, his kind of black and whiteness is just another abstract part of that image, really. And the one on the right, Japanese interior, I think is absolutely stunning. So it seems to me that that painting has a, in the way that the one on the left has a push-pull going backwards and forwards with the drawers, the one on the right has a lovely sort of vertical and horizontal, so it's kind of pulling upwards and then going sideways. And you can see again the objects she's chosen to paint there. She's actually looking at the space around them. She's painting the space around and between as much as she's painting the objects themselves. If you look at the circular object that's dangling, and then inside it has a square at an angle, and inside that another square at another angle, it seems to me that that draws you in, and the square is twisting and turning inside of that circle, almost like when you zoom in on a camera lens or a telescope. And then you can see the black object just down to the left of that. Somehow she's come up with this brilliant shape which perfectly sums up that movement of something twisting within something else. And then she pushes your hair along and up and along and up. I just think that's the most beautiful, understated, quiet piece of painting, which to me is very much all about the space between things and the way things may or may not interconnect, which I think is a large part of the Cabinet of Curiosity. So I'm going to leave us there for now and pass over to Susan.
Hi everybody, that was just fantastic, Alison, and the things that have been coming into the chat box as well. I mean, we could do with so many more sessions. There are lots and lots of issues that people have been mentioning about the things that we have in collections, the questions about colonialism, who owns objects. You've been talking about how we arrange them, display them. We've also had some indications from history about how people access them. So much to say about it, and I know that we'll all want to be doing some of our own work later in the session. When we thought we would try and be quite playful, although that doesn't mean things might not be serious as well. We were thinking particularly about the fact that cabinets of curiosities were really precursors to, although things in their own rights, modern museums. And there was a sort of segue, if you like, from cabinets of curiosity, whether they were rooms that people could access, whether they were sessions that were run by the Royal Society in this country, or whether they were travelling shows almost, when they somehow was a shift into what we might now recognise as a modern museum, with all those questions of colonialism, ownership, whether things should go back to the people and countries that they were effectively stolen from or collected from or occasionally bought from. We thought that it would be fascinating to just bear in mind things like real preoccupations with museums these days as well, around questions of authenticity and provenance, just where do things come from, and also how we label things. And it's really interesting talking to curators about how they might have labelled something 30, 40 years ago. I remember going to a literary museum, not Dove Cottage, where something was labelled at great length as being believed to be similar to something that might have belonged to. And I don't think you get labels that are quite like that anymore, but we thought we could enjoy that. So we're going to show a film of Poppy Garrett, who's one of our assistant curators at the museum. And there's lots of reasons for showing this film, not least because Poppy is absolutely passionate about Robert Southey. And the film shows her exploring Southey's Cabinet of Curiosities. And for someone who is very expert in her field, I think it's fascinating that you'll notice that quite frequently in the course of the film she resorts to simply saying wow. And that's exactly what cabinets of curiosity were meant to do, and what we would hope that museums and other collections would do for people, that it really inspires not just curiosity but, you know, real passion and enthusiasm. So while we watched Poppy's film, which I'll ask Lucy to start to show us shortly, we thought it would be interesting for people to be just maybe jotting down some thoughts that we can share immediately afterwards about fanciful labelling. So we thought that possibly if you could be thinking about making up a very long label for a very tiny object, for instance, or a very short label for something that's absolutely profound and conceptual, or labels that simply do not relate apparently at all to the object that they're describing. And all of that can become part of our own sort of slightly offbeat Cabinet of Curiosities that we'll be working on for the second half of the session. So Lucy, if you could start to show us Poppy's film. And I think just before that, a couple of images that show what Southey's own Cabinet of Curiosities looks like. Although in the best museum tradition, there's a question about whether it really was his Cabinet of Curiosities. Thank you.
Okay. First image here, Susan. I'm not sure if you need to say anything on this one.
So this is the Cabinet of Curiosities that we have in Grasmere. It's actually perched very safely, I have to say, outside our curator's office. And it is, as we'll discover in the course of the film, full of fascinating objects. The cabinet itself is beautifully carved and very intriguing. And if you can just show us the next image, Lucy, that would be lovely. Which will invite us to step inside the cabinet. Yeah. Yes, so these are some of the objects that you see when you open the drawers. And in Poppy's film, she'll talk us through some of the things that she finds in there, including things that she's never before seen, which all adds to the wow factor. Thank you. So if we could start the film, that'd be great, Lucy.
Hi everyone, my name's Poppy and I'm one of the assistant curators for collections here at the Wordsworth Trust. We're going to be looking inside the Southey's Cabinet of Curiosities. Cabinets of Curiosity were basically the first ever museums. They were people's personal collections of weird and wonderful treasures, and these would often be collected from all corners of the world, especially as travel became much more widespread and people began to discover new places. You would bring back specimens or natural history pieces, human anatomy pieces. People had artworks in there, spiritual things, all kinds of stuff. So a Cabinet of Curiosity was really just a bizarre amalgamation of all of these different disciplines, little treasures, little pieces, and you could wow your guests with them when they came to see your home. So this particular collection came to the Wordsworth Trust from Greta Hall, which was the home that Southey shared with Coleridge, and it's stored in a chest that is marked with Robert Southey's name, but we think the collection probably came from his daughter Edith May Southey and her husband and her father-in-law, because Henry de Grey Water, who is Edith's father-in-law, he was like a lover of natural history, and a lot of the things seem to be later than Southey's lifetime, so we think they're probably collected from like the mid-1800s. So I picked a few drawers, and I've personally not ever seen inside these drawers before. Let's see what weird and wonderful treasures are inside. So we have a tiny needle case in the shape of a lute. I think this was made by Edith Southey, who was Southey's eldest daughter. We've got the harp in the collection as well. So I have seen something kind of along those lines before. Got some little figurines. Got a little packet here with some writing on it. Some manuscripts. Oh! It's Herbert Coleridge's hair. A lock of Herbert Coleridge's hair for dear godmama. So Herbert Coleridge was Sarah Coleridge's son, Samuel Taylor Coleridge's daughter, Sarah, her son. It's a piece of his hair. He's very blonde. There's a teeny tiny seal on it as well. He's 19 months old. This is from Waterloo, 1815. How amazing is that? I don't know what it is. It seems like a kind of medallion or something. It's phenomenal. And then we've got loads of boxes. These are from all over, bits of sapphire and ruby from Cape somewhere. There's all kinds of stones in here. There's a tiny brown box that says it contains a moonstone. Oh, it really is tiny. Little moonstone in there. Just quite nice. Oh, I know what this is. There's a lot of playing cards in here, decks of cards. And I've read that one of them is a tarot card deck, which I am very excited about. So we'll see if this is that deck. I don't know, just seems like it's just normal. They look hand illustrated actually. Some playing cards. Nice. This might be it. This one feels less complete. Oh, these are strange. These are astrological cards. So I've got one here that says Virgo on it. This must be the tarot cards. So yeah, we have here old tarot cards, and there's swords, and there's cups. Cups is the suit that symbolises your emotions. Tarot cards. So this box says it contains a snakeskin from Mr. DeWater from India. So let's have a look at that. Wow, it really does contain a snakeskin. So we're going to have a look at the second drawer. Okay, so we've got a lot of natural history in this one from first glance. There's a lot of talons and shells. Interesting. We've got some bangles. Another bangle. Also this little packet says it contains hanging of Bonaparte's bathroom and bed and drawing room at, and then there's an address that I can't read. Wow. Okay. Let's see. So it's little scraps of I think wallpaper or his interior decor. That's crazy. It's so bright, and there's a lot of detail on the fabric. It seems to be Hessian backed. Wow, he had good taste. What have we got here? RMS Lusitania sunk on her return journey from the United States, 1915. Oh, that's the Lusitania German medal. That's really cool. Looks double-sided. Wow, there's a newspaper clipping in there with it. See, this is later than a lot of other things in this collection. What's this? It's very bright. I like it. Any guesses as to what this might be? It might be riddles, it might be flashcards, it might be a study aid, it might be sort of like wisdom a day journals. They're really cool. Oh yeah, I think it is riddles. My first is a question, the negative side. In my second, a warrior opposes. My something has the failure of fortune supplied and has drawn out the thorns from the roses. Oh, this must be the geological drawer. There's a lot of rocks in here. This is a mummified frog, or I think it's a frog. It's definitely very dead. You can see its feet. I'm fascinated in a way. I can totally picture that being in someone's Cabinet of Oddities. Okay, well, there is clearly tons more to explore, but I think that's probably it.
I feel she needs a round of applause for that. I've watched that film 3-4 times, and every time I spot something different because of the enthusiasm with which she's delving into it all. It's amazing. So we've obviously been picking up on the particular objects in there. So if there's anything out of the cabinet at the service cabinet that you'd like to be labelling, that's fine. If you'd rather be thinking about labels for the objects that you've brought or that other people showed in the introduction rooms, that would be lovely. We were going to do a bit of scribing for that, but I think we might, because of time, move on to Alison talking more about how we arrange objects. And in the meantime, I'll pick up anything that I see in the chat box and start putting it up on the amazing work of art that Alison has produced for me to scribble on. So, is that all right, Alison?
Yeah, that's good. Hi there, can you hear me all right? Okay, so just so you know, I'm doing this on my phone, so apologies. I can't actually, I'm going to turn my phone down so that I can show you just what we're looking at here. Hopefully you can see my bit of paper, and hopefully you see my hands. Is that, oh good, okay. So I brought a few objects with me. Mine are all quite small because I'm working on a tiny space. So I don't know if you can see that. That's a little bottle I picked up from the seashore a couple of days ago. And it's, I don't know what was ever in that. It's very smooth on 3 sides where it's been tumbled in the sea. And I love the fact that I don't really know what it was for. So to me, that's quite an intriguing thing. I also like the shape and I like the colour. Now, I don't know whatever your object might be. I wondered if you might have a piece of paper, and I wondered about using the paper itself to decide how you might like to paint or draw your object, or you might choose to draw the same object from different angles. So, you know, you could have it whatever way you like, or you could put it beside something that possibly adds something different or makes you think about it in a different way. So this is an amazing leaf that I found the other day. I also wondered if you might experiment with different backgrounds and colours. So perhaps if you can see the holes in that leaf, you'll see how different things are when you change the colour to the green. I think it's worth exploring and investigating. So here we are. I have a few objects here. There's things I've picked up really along the years. Each one interesting to me, but from our point of view, I wondered, think back to what we were saying about how objects were grouped or arranged, and to how, when we were looking at the Elizabeth Blackadder paintings particularly, how she would paint the space between things. So sometimes less is more, and sometimes you need to play around with the backdrops. So you might take your object and try putting it onto something patterned, for example, and maybe the relationship between things would be interesting. So I quite like the fact that this weird little spiral has become camouflaged, and the heaviness of this shape of the stone. So I might choose to paint that on that background, in which case I would suggest making a painting where actually the edges of your paper or your fabric are in fact the edges of your painting, and you're looking directly down on it. That's a suggestion you don't have to do. That's one possibility. Another might be to maybe some leaves here. And in a way, I think the interesting thing is not so much, well, it could be just one object, which is quite beautiful, in which case you might want to spend time turning it around, really look at all the little intricacies of its shape, and then maybe decide what background it would go on and whether. So what I'm saying, I think, is to try and compose your objects on a sheet of paper. So I quite like the way, I don't know if you can see that, I'm going to hold that up a bit. I've got a wee buttercup one here, which kind of, to me, that balances this out. And so this is an odd thing, but when you arrange something on a piece of paper, some things just feel right and others don't. I would go with that and explore it. So perhaps the density of something really heavy with the lightness of something. And you might even hold one thing above the other. So look, if I was to paint that, I think I might be tempted to focus in on this little bit and try and draw the tiny fragile bits here against this really solid. And look, when you look closely at that, you can see it's got little markings, which are not dissimilar to these tiny little feathery markings. So play around with your object and have a think about what colour you might place it on, and try things out. So, for example, I'm a collector of all manner of bits of paper. What can I say? I just am. So you can see how you can get quite dynamic and interesting things happening just by playing with the colour that you place behind, or the object itself. So maybe I quite like that. So I think I might paint that. And what I will do is use the edge of my paper as pure blue. But if you can see here, that's not, it's not actually square with the paper, and I quite like that. So I might paint that in. So anyway, I would suggest spend a little bit of time arranging your objects such that you feel it's interesting in some way, and then leave a space. I think I will leave a space here probably, which we can represent there, for me to write an enormous label which suggests a narrative of what might be occurring between these two. In my brain, these are having a conversation, and my label is going to be all about what they're talking about. But you do this in your way. It can be very factual, it could be a list of things, or it could be just observation. It could be what you see and what you think about, or it could be just one word. Anyway, I'm going to leave you there to think about all of that and let you get on and have a try.
That was fascinating, Alison. So yes, if we take 10, possibly 15 minutes now, just as quiet time for us to draw or sketch, write our labels, but definitely take some time to just see how we arrange things and how that shifts the whole dynamic and look and feel of something. That'd be great. So enjoy the next few minutes, and we'll meet back and share things that we've been producing and thinking. And in the meantime, if you want to pop anything in the chat box for us, do say. Great. See you soon.
Oops. Something I maybe meant to say and forgot was it's kind of nice, I think, when you paint objects to think a bit about the textures and the way in which you're painting them. So maybe if something's quite soft and smudgy, maybe it could be appropriate to use your fingers or a cloth, or add lots of water. Or I've just been squidging some paint on a piece of sandpaper there. So it's kind of got that nice sort of rough texture, which seems to me quite interesting, given that I've got a sort of speckledy rock. So I think it's kind of nice to try and find a way of painting the object which suits it. So if it's very angular, then it might be appropriate to use a biro and a ruler, or it might be appropriate to mask bits out and paint the spaces in between. So I kind of meant to say all of that, but anyway, I think do it in your own way, but make it appropriate to the object is probably my best advice.
Hi, I think we should probably be coming back together if we want to show anything that's been produced. There's some wonderful things appearing in the chat box. I'm partway through writing up your poem, Peter. But we've had a lupin seed, and we've had a whole fledgling cabinet. We've had some a wonderful item that may or may not have been connected to Elvis Presley. So lots of fun there. So Alison, do you want to maybe just invite people to share things that they want to show us?
So it'd be lovely if anyone has had a chance to start on paintings or drawings of their objects. I think it's interesting to start with an object and then see where it leads you in your imagination. So if anyone does have anything, that'd be lovely if you want to show us.
Alison, we had a comment from Jo in the chat box with a mask that she'd like to show us. So Jo, if you unmute yourself and just start talking, we'll be able to see you in your mask. That would be lovely.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yeah, I can hear you if I'm listening carefully.
As I'm on furlough now, I've been making a mask the last few days.
Wow.
I thought I'd share it with you. Yeah, I just got
yeah.
a mache mask, and then I've been decorating it, and I seem to have gone with the theme of air, so I'll show you it. I hope you don't think... So this is the time when I don't know if it's really weird. I'll just have to trust. So can you see my mask?
Oh, that's fantastic.
So I've tried to do it with found things, so I've got all the feathers that I've found, but the best bit is a moth that got stuck in a cobweb in my next door neighbour's house, and she gave me it. Can you see that?
That's wonderful. Yes.
It's beautiful, isn't it? So
wow.
beautiful. So I've got I've got another moth there, and then I think that's a woodpecker feather that I found.
Yeah, isn't that wonderful?
Anyway, thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you for showing us. That's brilliant. And you know, it really feels like one of those objects that makes you wonder what's, you know, like what are all those little bits, where have they all come from, and how did the bird lose its feathers, and where did you collect them? And you could make a pretend label about where you found that could be quite extraordinary.
Yeah, I think I will need to label, because I love collecting things. I have little jars of acorns and shells and things. So maybe labelling is the next stage. Yeah,
and isn't it interesting how things appear slightly differently when you put them in a box or a jar? Then suddenly you look at them a bit differently. I think that's really interesting.
That's exactly what I was writing about, because I have a jar of sand here that I got from Spain, and I was writing that when I got it, it was warm and golden coloured, but now it's gold. Now it's cold and looks dark because its environment has changed and you can't capture the sun.
And you know, I think that's true of a lot of objects. When you take them out of their context, sometimes that makes you look at them more carefully, but sometimes it sort of takes the essence out of them a bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, the magic's gone a little bit.
I think that's why it might be really a lovely thing to write about or paint objects, because you sort of give it its magic back via your own imagination, I suppose.
Yeah, I'll do that with the sand, maybe.
Thank you. It'd be great if you did anything. Would you send it on?
Yes, of course I will,
It'd be brilliant, because we're going to keep adding to this big piece that Susan is writing on. So thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that's had a chance to write or draw?
Helen wants to share.
Hi, Helen.
Hi.
Oh, hello. How are you?
I'm all right, thanks. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you.
I'll show you my things first of all. Number one is this.
Oh, nice.
Which is
you know what? I think that might be friends with this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. How weird is that?
This is a pavement find, and I actually put out on social media, did anybody know what it was? And all sorts of makers joined in the conversation, and I'm really delighted that nobody knows what it is.
Okay.
I'm quite happy.
Interesting.
It was really to know what it is. Also, I really like that it doesn't have a name. I really like that we look more at things when we can't actually give them a label, maybe.
Yeah. And it kind of looks like a squiggly line. It's really cool.
Yeah, I don't know whether it had a function or whether it was a space in between. But when we were at Falmouth, there was a book on the shelves that I never read called "Seeing is Forgetting the Name of a Thing," or something along those lines. I just think it's a really lovely little phrase. I also had a little bit of, I don't know whether you can make that out, as a piece of shepherd's purse.
Oh, that's lovely.
And an offcut of an envelope. I missed, I've got a really slow internet connection, so I missed your demo, sorry about that. And so what I did was, I haven't got very far. I divided my page to begin with. I gave myself a square format because I quite liked your comment about Instagram being the way that we currently curate our own Cabinet of Curiosities. And then I remembered at school having those exercise books that had space for your picture and the writing at the bottom.
Yeah, like daily diary.
Yeah, just something thought, oh, I really, really like that. So that's as far as I've got. I've used a bit of biro and a bit of scoring through, but I haven't really got very far. It was just nice to make a start.
Yeah, thank you. It's really cool, isn't it? It's a way of almost ordering your thoughts when you start to draw things down, I think. Yeah, and it doesn't really matter whether it works out properly as you expected or not. It's a way of thinking, isn't it?
Yeah, it's always, like a series of very deliberate, very, very careful mistakes, I think.
Yeah, I quite like the idea that you could keep those mistakes in different drawers and then sort of relate to them when the time's right. Yeah. I have a whole house full of those, I have to say, to be honest. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Does anyone else want to show us anything, if we have time?
We also had Carol mention that she'd like to share.
Oh, Carol, I'd love to see what you've been up to.
Oh, well, sadly, it's not what I have started writing something about them. I think it was an old family friend. I spent a lot of time in hospital as a child, and I was allowed to come home and have a bed in the window. And the local policeman, Sergeant Robinson, used to come along, and he was a lovely man. And I think it was him that gave me this. I don't know if you can see it. It's. I mean, obviously, it's very battered and faded, but it's this beautiful box, and it contains a selection of shells. I mean, I don't know how old they are. They're oh, sorry. I'm forgetting. There's an abalone, and there's and they used to have the little names, the Latin names, and as a child I winkled them out. And I think they're probably lost in the mists of time, but you know, from sort of seeing the things today, it just reminded me of them, and I've just gone and taken it out, and it's something that I've always loved, and I revisit. So I think there's going to be a poem about shells.
Yeah, I love the sound of it when you're moving it around. It makes a lovely noise. I hope that your poem might have something of that noise in it. Yeah, it's very special.
They're just so tactile as well. They're just beautiful. And I started because the Latin names are beautiful too. So I think if I do a bit of research about that, you know, because I don't know, I just found that one of them is called something like a frog shell or something. I don't know. I had no idea. I know the basics. But I'm sure that, you know, there's some fascinating things. So yes, I shall be working on that this week.
Wow, brilliant. I love the idea that you winkled out the names as well. That's something really...
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it anyway.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. It's brilliant. Did anyone else want to show us anything?
Okay. Can you hear me? It's Gabrielle again.
Hi, Gabriella.
Hi. So I don't normally paint or anything like that. I'm a writer, so I decided not to write. But I did have a little experiment, which is odd, but it's interesting, I think. So I've arranged a few things, like a picture of my son, bit of Lego,
cool.
The angry bit of annoyed bit of glasses, because it's a little bit broken at the moment, his glasses, and then there's my mouse, which is just arranged on here.
Okay.
So I just got a bit of an envelope and just ripped it.
Yep.
And
lovely.
I use coffee as my because it's interesting when you use bits from the kitchen, I think sometimes.
Yeah, it's always good to use coffee, I think, because it's kind of unexpected. I love the way you've placed it all in an envelope as well. That's really it's a great way to
I quite like the fact that you can change it, because there were bits of edges. I quite like the fact that you can change the like move.
Definitely.
From there. You know what I mean? So
would you put any words in between, or not so much?
Yeah, I don't know. It was just a bit of an experiment, really. It was just something calming to do.
I really, the way you're holding it there, I really like that shape at the top of the envelope. Is really lovely, actually.
Yeah.
It talks to the images that you've drawn on, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
I like that when the edges kind of replicate the shapes inside.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I'm hoping you've got more envelopes that you can rip up and keep going with this.
I've got loads of envelopes, actually. That's the one thing I thought, oh, my paper wasn't very the paper that I had, I realised wasn't thick enough to be able to take the water, and I was like, oh, what have I got here? And I was like, oh, I've got envelopes, I can use that. And then,
oh gosh, I use envelopes always. I think they're brilliant things. And also I love the idea of using stuff that's not necessarily made for the purpose, like sandpaper can be really nice to draw on. And weirdly, just things like cling film can be quite nice to put paint on and then push it on and print with it. I mean, you know, for me there's no rules, but a kitchen is a properly good place to find all the things you need. Before you know it, you're going to be sprinkling turmeric and God knows what on your envelopes. There'll be all manner of weirdness. If you do carry on with it, would you send us any other stuff through that you maybe?
Yeah, sure, of course. Yeah, thank you.
That's really nice to see. Thank you. Is there anyone else to talk?
We've got time for maybe one more.
I'm told we've got one more person. Oh, hi Sue.
Oh, yeah, hello. Is that right? Me? Yeah. I started off with my, I don't know if you can see, an acorn in a cup.
Oh, nice.
And it's special for me because a friend of mine has an autistic little girl, and when she has meltdowns once, so I have two of these, and I calmed her down. She was hiding under the bed, and I just she loves pigs, so an acorn, so I took it over and just put it in the middle of the bed, and this hand came out. It was wonderful. And anyway, I started with this, and I just put it, I can't really show you, but I put it on a piece of paper which is on a placemat on my kitchen table. And I suddenly thought they're so well suited, these, but they're looking for each other. So I wrote down belonging, and then I thought you could separate it to say be longing. You know, you're longing to be with that thing. And then I thought of other things. So I've got this little saffron pot, and I took the lid off and put that somewhere else. And then I've got some feathers, and I was thinking, well, this belonged to a bird, you know, and it's no longer needed. And then a candle with a lighter, and I've just been playing around with arranging them, and I can't really show you, but it was the process which I found so fascinating.
The process of arranging is really interesting, isn't it?
It just, I mean, that's where I got the idea of belonging and separating. And I'm just I'm going to play with it. And then, sorry, it's on a placemat, so I put a knife and fork around the edges. Because that's where I feel I belong. This is my kitchen. This is my safe place where I eat. So it was sort of framing it somehow. So so I've just taken photos of it, really. Yeah, that was it. So thank you. So inspiring. Love it.
I think you've taken photos as well. I think in the arranging, in actual. So that's really lovely. If you would send us any photos through, that would be brilliant. And I love that there's a bit of a kitchen. There's a kitchen theme emerging. The kitchen cabinet is.
I'll get some coffee and splash it all over.
Gabrielle's already had a go with the coffee, which is all fantastic. Thank you. And it's really interesting, isn't it? How when you arrange a thing, you do start to think about it differently. Like you start to think about how things interconnect, and you can imagine almost how walking into one of those old, you know, 17th century rooms, you probably would have started picking things up and arranging them and having a think about stuff. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. Right, we better go back to Lucy, because I have a feeling we might have run out of time. Let's have a see what Lucy says.
Hi. We are out of time, I'm afraid. That went so quickly and that was so lovely. Thank you very much. Alison and Susan, is there anything that you want to say before we head off? We can maybe be a few more minutes if people don't mind hanging on.
I think we'd really, well, we're really sorry we haven't had a chance to see everything that people have been working on. So please do send us images and any words, and we'll be sure to incorporate it all into the finished pieces that we're going to be working on. To help us with that, if people have got work inspired by any of the 3 sessions, or you know, if they could let us have it by Monday, Monday the 20th, that would be great. And then we'll spend some time during that week working together on putting it into some sort of shareable form, which we would love to display at Eden, if that's okay. Possibly with an option on touring it to the Wordsworth Trust at Grasmere at some stage. It'd be great for people to see it. Alison, was there anything that you wanted to add?
So I would just add that we're really looking forward to putting this all together as one kind of piece of artwork that will be collage from all 3 sessions. We're going to print out anything you do send in, and with a mixture of writing the words on pieces and collaging what we already have. We're hoping to weave together a sort of large and intriguing artwork that marks in physical reality what has been a really lovely set of sessions in the virtual world. And just massive thanks to everybody who's joined in and made it really, really a great process, which I have to say I was a bit scared about doing this over a phone screen. But the sense of engagement from people and all the things that have been made has made it really a joy to be part of. So thank you very much for your engagement.
It's been terrific, Alison.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you, Alison, and thank you, Susan, so much. This is the first one that I've been able to join, and it's been brilliant. I'm kind of sad I've missed the other 2 actually. So there's a couple of comments in the chat box. So I will send things through as a follow-up to your email addresses. So I'll send through the presentation that Alison shared and more details of where you can see the previous sessions. They've been recorded and they're on YouTube too. So we will follow that up, and yes, we'll work together on creating something to combine them. And we might have to ask Eden if we can show it at Eden. I'm not sure we've got that far yet, but we'll see what we can do. I'm just going to add into the chat box now where you can find out about our other sessions. So we've got lots of workshops for kind of community-minded folk on our Facebook page. So I'll add a link into the chat box there. And yeah, there's a few comments about more sessions like this. So we haven't got anything planned in with Alison and Susan, but I'm sure potentially we can talk about something. I think they've been a lovely like a distraction and a really nice creative thing for people to do, especially people who haven't tried before. So they have been a really fun and open way to engage with that. So let's have a chat, maybe Alison and Susan, and we'll see. Yeah, perfect. I'll share some details. I'll pop my email address in the chat so you can send me any artwork. And yeah, thank you all for joining. And again, thank you to Susan and Alison. It's been lovely.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you, Lucy and Katie and Tracy, for all the technical help as well. And also, if you can save the chat and pass it on, that'll be fantastic. It's full of things.
Thank you, everyone. It's been amazing.